I built that company from my kitchen table. And they replaced me with a 24-year-old kid who couldn't even spell profit. That's how this story begins. Not with failure, but with betrayal. My name's Ethan Cole, and for 8 years, Westridge Dynamics was my life. I wasn't the CEO, but I might as well have been. I was the senior operations director, the fixer, the guy who stayed late, skipped weekends, and turned chaos into order. The CEO, Martin Heller, used to call me his right-hand man. I believed him. We weren't just colleagues. I thought we were friends. Martin would invite me to family barbecues, ask my advice on his speeches, even have me sign off on major decisions when he was too tired. I trusted him. That trust was my first mistake. When I first joined Westridge, it was a mess, outdated systems, high turnover, zero direction. But I had a vision. I streamlined operations, cut waste, boosted morale, and turned the company profitable within 2 years. I didn't do it for glory. I did it because I believed in building something real, something that mattered. So when Martin introduced his nephew Chase, I didn't think much of it. Fresh blood, he said, clapping Chase on the back during an all-hands meeting. He's got an MBA from Stanford and a passion for leadership. Chase looked like the poster child for privilege. Sharp suit, slick hair, that overconfident grin that said he'd never heard the word no. But I gave him a chance. Everyone deserves one, right? He shadowed me for weeks. Asked questions that made no sense. Smiled too much. Took notes on everything, not like he wanted to learn, but like he was collecting data for something. Still, I brushed it off. Martin said he wanted Chase to learn the ropes. I thought I was mentoring the next generation. Turns out, I was training my replacement. At first, it was little things. Chase being copied on my emails, sitting in on meetings without warning, casually dropping new ideas that sounded suspiciously like my old ones. Then Martin started canceling our one-on-ones. Busy quarter, he'd say. I told myself it was fine. I'd been through worse corporate games before. But one night, I stayed late, as usual, and overheard a conversation outside Martin's office. Chase's voice. Ethan's great, but he's old school. I can modernize things around here. Uncle, trust me. Uncle. That was the first crack in the foundation. I remember walking to my desk, heart pounding, pretending I hadn't heard. I told myself it didn't mean anything. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. Something was about to change. And when it did, it would change everything. I tried to ignore the unease in my gut. I told myself I was overreacting, that Martin wouldn't turn on me after everything we'd built. But the truth? The cracks were already spreading. It started with meetings I wasn't invited to. Strategy sessions that had always included me were suddenly informal chats between Martin and Chase. I'd find out about new initiatives from internal memos, ones that had Chase's name at the bottom where mine used to be. One morning, I walked into the office and noticed something small, but sharp. My desk had been moved. No explanation. Just pushed 3 feet closer to the window, with Chase's new desk planted directly beside mine. Better collaboration, he said, flashing that too bright grin. I laughed it off, but I felt it, that subtle shift. My space. My authority. Shrinking, inch by inch. Chase started calling Martin Uncle openly now, not just in private. The first time he did it during a team meeting, the room went awkwardly silent. Then Martin chuckled, brushed it off, and moved on. But I caught the look in a few employees' eyes, that quick flicker of realization that the rules had changed. Soon after, Martin's tone toward me shifted. Little things. Jokes that felt more like jabs. Ethan, you're great at the old systems, but we're moving fast these days, huh? He'd say it with a smile, but it stung. I started coming in earlier, staying later, trying to prove my worth all over again. But no matter how much I did, Chase always seemed one step ahead. He'd suggest a new workflow, something I'd already been planning, and Martin would praise him for being proactive. I didn't want to believe what was happening. Martin had been like a mentor, almost a father figure. When my own dad passed, Martin was the one who showed up at the funeral. The one who told me, "Your family, Ethan. Always." So when I caught them whispering in the glass conference room, doors closed, blinds half drawn, I didn't knock. I stood there for a moment, pretending to scroll my phone, trying to catch a word or two. I didn't hear much, but I saw something worse. Martin nodded, slow and serious, while Chase smiled that quiet, satisfied smile. Later that night, I checked my inbox. An email from Martin. "Let's start transitioning some of your responsibilities to Chase, just temporarily, while we evaluate new structures." Evaluate. That word echoed in my mind like a warning bell. I stared at the screen until the words blurred. For the first time, I couldn't tell if I was angry or afraid. Something precious, the company I helped build, the loyalty I thought was unbreakable, was slipping through my fingers. And somewhere deep down, beneath the denial and confusion, I could feel it. This wasn't just business. It was personal. The day it happened started like any other. Bad coffee, stale donuts, and a full inbox waiting to swallow me whole. But there was a meeting on my calendar that morning, one I hadn't scheduled, Executive Transition Review, 9 a.m. I thought it was a mistake. A typo. Something routine. But when I walked into the glass conference room, I knew. The air was thick with quiet. Martin was already seated, Chase beside him, smiling faintly like a cat that had already eaten the canary. "Ethan," Martin said, voice calm, rehearsed. "Have a seat." There were HR reps. 2 of them. I didn't even know their names. That's when I realized. This wasn't a meeting. It was an execution. Martin folded his hands. "You've been incredible for this company. Truly. But as we move into a new era of leadership, we need to modernize. Chase will be stepping into your role as operations director." I blinked. "My role?" He nodded, not meeting my eyes. "We'll be offering you a consulting position during the transition. Reduced hours. You'll still be part of the team, of course." Chase leaned forward. "You've been an amazing mentor, Ethan. Really. I'll make sure to keep your systems running smoothly." That word again. Mentor. Like I'd just been a placeholder. I felt my throat tighten. "Martin, after everything we've done? The late nights, the expansions, He cut me off. "This isn't personal. It's business. Chase brings a fresh perspective, and—" "No," I said quietly. "This is exactly personal." He sighed, like I was the one disappointing him. Then came the final blow. The slide deck Chase had prepared, the new operational vision. Every chart, every bullet point, every workflow diagram. They were mine. The plans I'd spent months refining. The ones I'd shared with Martin in confidence. Only now, my name was gone. Chase's logo sat on every page. I looked at Martin, the man who once called me family. His eyes flickered away, just for a moment, and that was all the confirmation I needed. Something in me went cold. They offered me a handshake. I didn't take it. I gathered my things. My notebooks, my pen, the framed photo of the team from our first product launch. Chase was in that photo too, fresh-faced, standing just behind me. Funny how the knife always comes from behind. I walked out of that glass room without saying another word. The office felt different, colder, unfamiliar. People looked up from their desks, whispering, eyes darting away. They all knew. Everyone knew. Outside, the autumn air hit my face like ice. I stood there for a long time, staring at the building I'd helped build, the one that no longer had a place for me. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from something sharper. Rage. I'd given them everything. And they'd stolen it from me. But as I stood there, a strange calm settled in. If they wanted to play games, I'd play. Only this time, I'd be the one writing the rules. For 3 days after that meeting, I barely moved. My apartment looked like a war zone, half-packed boxes from when I thought I'd be moving closer to the office, takeout containers stacked like regret, and my company badge lying face down on the counter. Every morning, I woke up thinking it was just a bad dream. Then I'd check my phone and see the headlines. Westridge Dynamics announces leadership refresh. Young visionary takes charge. Young visionary. Chase. Each word cut deeper. I'd built that company from the ground up, and now I didn't even exist in its story. On the third night, I found myself scrolling through old emails, half out of masochism, half out of disbelief. I stumbled across one from Martin, dated years back. The subject line read, "You're the reason this company breathes." The body was short. "Never forget, Ethan. Loyalty like yours builds legacies. You're irreplaceable. Irreplaceable." That word broke something in me. And then, strangely, it built something new. I sat there, the laptop's glow flickering across the darkroom, and laughed. Quiet at first, then louder. Because I realized what had really happened. They hadn't replaced me because I was weak. They replaced me because I was strong enough to threaten them. Chase hadn't earned anything. Martin hadn't moved on. They'd taken a shortcut, one that depended on me staying quiet, on me accepting it. And that's when the shift happened. The grief drained away, replaced by something sharper. Focus. I went back through old files, contracts, records. I knew the company inside out, every client, every deal, every secret corner of the system. I knew where the inefficiencies were buried, and I knew exactly how dependent Martin's empire was on the infrastructure I designed. A thought formed, reckless at first, then solid, unshakable. They'd taken my name off the company. But the foundation, the code, the processes, the client relationships, those were mine. Without me, Westridge wasn't a company. It was a hollow shell. I opened my notebook, the same one I'd carried through every meeting, and wrote 3 words on a blank page. Take it back. Not just my job. Not my title. Everything. That night, I slept for the first time in days. Not peacefully, but with purpose. Because somewhere between betrayal and exhaustion, I made a promise. Not out loud, not even to myself, but to the ghost of everything I'd lost. I would rebuild. I would rise. And when I was done, Martin and his precious nephew would learn one final lesson. Never underestimate the man who built the empire you stole. I stopped thinking like the man who had lost everything and started thinking like the architect who'd built it. Revenge, I realized, wasn't thunderous. It was surgical. It required patience, proof, and people who had something to gain from the truth. I dug into the things they assumed only I cared about. Change logs, signed approvals, archived emails, vendor contracts. I pulled every version control commit I'd made, every project plan with timestamps, every expense report that proved how much I'd rescued them from. Where my name had been scrubbed from slides, I found backups. Where Martin had shifted funds into vague consulting accounts, I found invoices. These weren't guerrilla tricks. They were receipts of reality. Betrayal isolates people, but it also creates allies. I reached out quietly to the CFO I'd kept on good terms. He'd been suspicious of Chase's sudden influence. I found a handful of engineers who resented the new optics-driven directives that doubled their workload without resources. An old client, the CEO of a logistics firm who'd trusted me for years, agreed to meet after I reminded him how many near disasters I'd averted for his account. None of them wanted drama. They wanted fairness. And fairness needed facts. I didn't yet want a courtroom, but I needed to know my options. A lawyer friend ran a discreet conflict of interest check and noted several governance lapses that could make the board nervous. The CFO ran projections showing how the new vision would tank margins unless Chase's proposed changes were reversed. Numbers and legal opinions become hard to ignore in boardrooms. I didn't hack anything, bribe anyone, or stage a scandal. I let Martin and Chase reveal themselves. I did what I'd always done best: make systems transparent. I started forwarding verifiable timelines to allies, nudging the right people toward asking the right questions. I quietly coordinated with the client to call a meeting about expected deliverables. Deliverables Martin's new plan had jeopardized. I briefed the CFO to present the financial stress points at the next audit. I leaked nothing. I simply put the right documents into the right hands at the right time. With the engineer cohort, I ensured deployment logs and rollback records were accessible. With the client, I secured a serious buyer's interest in a non-compete scenario, a gentle reminder to the board that client confidence was fragile. With the lawyer, I drafted a shareholder-ready memo outlining governance concerns. Momentum builds when risk starts to show up as real cost. I moved with the calm of someone who knows the building's wiring. Where they saw noise, I saw patterns. Where they celebrated innovation, I saw risk. And while Martin toasted Chase at the company holiday party, believing the war already won, I was assembling the case that would make winning look like ruin. I wasn't a saboteur. I was the mirror. And mirrors don't scream, they reflect. That night I sat alone in my kitchen, the memos stacked neatly beside me. I reread the timeline I'd composed and smiled for the first time since the glass conference room. The pieces were falling into place. In the morning, someone would make a call. In a week, a board member might lose sleep. In a month, Martin's confident smile might crack. I closed my notebook and whispered the vow I'd written on its first page. Take it back. Somewhere inside Westridge, very quietly, the fuse had been lit. You said. The boardroom felt like a courtroom. Same polished table, same neutral lighting, but this time the air was electric with anticipation, because I hadn't walked in to beg. I'd walked in to unmask. I handed a thick binder to the lead independent director and watched his thumb flick through pages he'd never seen. Annotated slide decks with original timestamps, archived commits with my username, vendor invoices showing reallocated funds, and the shareholder-ready memo the lawyer had helped me shape. The room went quietly taut. It started with the CFO. He stood, calm, meticulous, exactly the way I'd coached him to be. He ran the numbers, projected margin collapses if Chase's new efficiencies were implemented, cash flow drainage into off-books consulting accounts, client concentration risk exposed by the new strategy. He didn't use adjectives. Facts were sharper than outrage. When he finished, you could see doubt spreading like a stain. Then the client walked in. Not to testify, but to announce their decision. Due to missed deliverables and questionable changes to their contract roadmap, they were invoking an exit clause. A murmured gasp. Losing that account overnight translated to millions, and suddenly the board's refresh felt less visionary and more reckless. My lawyer stood next. She laid out the governance failures. Failure to disclose conflicts of interest, process lapses in the executive transition, and the unusual redirection of funds to a familial entity without board approval. The word fiduciary hung in the air like a verdict. A director flipped back through meeting minutes where my name used to appear and no longer did. Finally, we played the slide deck Chase had used to oust me, the shiny new vision, now annotated in real time with my original notes, version control metadata proving authorship, and emails where Martin praised my initiatives long before Chase ever mentioned them. The room saw the pattern. Not innovation but appropriation. Chase tried to smile. Martin tried to steady his voice. This is politics, he said. A misunderstanding. But the mirror was unforgiving. Directors whispered into phones. Council asked for a recess. Outside the glass, the engineers I'd rallied released a sanitized report showing the recent deployments tied to Chase's directives had increased error rates and customer incidents. Not finger-pointing. Just data. The board's anxiety turned to alarm. By afternoon, the board voted to suspend Martin pending a full audit and appointed an interim committee to investigate conflict of interest concerns. Chase's title was frozen. His email access cut. The press smelled blood and circled. The same company that had toasted his arrival now watched him escorted from the building, hands trembling, the smile gone, colleagues averting their eyes. Martin tried to reach for me afterward in the hallway, an awkward hand extended, a pleading tone, but the doors closed before we touched. His empire's applause evaporated into a series of dull clicks as reporters' recorders filled the silence. I felt none of the cathartic gloating I'd fantasized about. Instead, there was a strange, small emptiness, an echo from the man who once called me family. Around me, cameras flashed. Someone shouted questions I didn't answer. The boardroom's glass reflected 100 faces, all watching the fall. As Martin and Chase disappeared into a knot of security and legal counsel, the building that had been my battlefield looked the same on the outside, unchanged and indifferent. Inside, everything had shifted. I stood in the hallway, the binder under my arm, and for a long heartbeat there was nothing but the sound of my own breathing. Then the silence broke, soft, solemn, and complete, the kind that follows a verdict. 6 months after the boardroom showdown, Westridge Dynamics looked like a ghost of what it used to be. The news had done its damage. Corporate nepotism scandal, CEO suspended pending investigation, investor confidence plummets. The headlines came fast, and they didn't stop. Chase vanished from the business world almost overnight. The last I heard, he tried to launch a consulting startup. It folded within 3 weeks. Turns out, charisma doesn't cover incompetence when there's no one left to steal ideas from. As for Martin Heller, he resigned before the audit finished. The board settled quietly, masking it as a retirement. I heard whispers that he'd sold his house, maybe moved abroad. Funny, the man who used to command boardrooms now couldn't even walk into one. And me. I didn't just move on. I moved up. When the interim committee realized the systems and client networks still relied on the architecture I'd built, they reached out, not for employment, but for a buyout. I negotiated, calmly, precisely, the value of my consulting and IP rights. Enough to buy controlling shares when the stock dipped during the scandal. And just like that, the man they replaced became the man who owned the company. When the sale cleared, I walked back into Westridge for the first time in months. The same glass doors. The same lobby smell, coffee, carpet, faint desperation. But this time, my name was on the paperwork. My company. My rules. I didn't fire anyone. I didn't raise my voice. Revenge didn't need to be loud, it just needed to last. Instead, I rebuilt what mattered. Fair promotions. Honest leadership. No empty promises about family. The employees who'd stayed loyal found raises waiting. The ones who'd whispered behind my back. They saw what real accountability looked like. Transparency, not cruelty. Late one evening, after the day's meetings, I stood alone in the corner office that used to belong to Martin. The city lights glowed below, endless and indifferent. On the desk sat my old company badge, the one I'd left behind the day they replaced me. It was scratched, faded, but still there. I held it for a moment, then smiled and slipped it into the drawer. Revenge hadn't brought peace, but justice had brought clarity. Because in the end, I hadn't just taken back what was stolen. I'd proven something deeper. You can replace a title. You can erase a name. But you can't erase legacy. And sometimes, the sweetest revenge isn't destroying the empire that betrayed you. It's owning it. If you've ever been betrayed, by a boss, a friend, or someone you trusted, tell me your story in the comments. Because sometimes, the best stories start with someone saying, "You're replaceable." And if you want to see more tales of betrayal, power, and poetic justice, hit subscribe. The next story might just be yours.